Okay, hi everybody. If you are joining us live or on the video, either way, you have likely seen this presentation before, and I can pretty much guarantee that you will see it again. I just mentioned to the people that are on live that I'm finding there's not enough times we can reiterate this information because everybody needs something at some point. So I'm going to try to walk through it pretty quickly because that way if we have any time for questions about the project or anything from anybody who's on, that might help anybody who's watching the recording. Let's jump into this. So APA in-tech citations. Again, you're using these in your assignments and in your papers and as you prepare for your dissertation writing. So all of the technical information and exercises that we do are all to help prepare you for your dissertation, to make this a smoother process when you get there for you and for your readers and your committee, but really so that your brain isn't trying to do too many different things at once. Read, write, and try to remember all the APA things. There are always going to be APA rules that you're going to have to look up, but the more that you can kind of commit to easily incorporating into your work, the better and easier it'll be for you. So all of this is obviously in the APA manual. Some of these items are also in the dissertation handbook, and then many of them, if not all, are on the APA style guide online. So you can look any of these up. This presentation brings everything together in one place for you, so I will post it into the course in the week 5 folder. All right, so narrative, just remember that in a narrative citation, you are writing out into the sentence the author names or et al., and then you're putting the year in parentheses. This does not require an additional parenthetical citation at the end of the sentence. Some of you are still doing that. It's one citation per statement, whether parenthetical or narrative. It can be either or. Now, could you find an exception to that rule where you say at the beginning of the sentence, Smith et al. 2018 explain that stars are individual suns, and then continue that sentence with kind of a second part that is then supported by a separate citation that you put in the parenthetical citation? Yes, that is not a typical way that things are going to occur, but that could be an exception. Generally, normally, if you're citing information from one source, you're choosing parenthetical or narrative. So keep that in mind. Remember, anytime, I think this is on a slide coming up, but if it's 3 or more authors, it is always et al. There's no more listing out all the authors anymore. So always et al. For 3 or more. For 2, you write and for 1, obviously, it's just the one name. When you write and, in a narrative citation, you're using the word and. So Smith and Jones. In a parenthetical citation, you're using the ampersand. All right, direct quotes. Some of you are kind of moving where the items go, and they can go in different places as long as it's clear that the information you're providing goes with that statement or vice versa. This you can read here. I won't go through this, but I will caution some of you are still using way too many direct quotes. So remember, direct quotes should always be kept to an absolute minimum. So in an entire dissertation, chapter 2, which is anywhere from 35 to 75 pages, you might have, a max of 5 direct quotes, if that. Some people won't even use them. You're not going to have 10, 15, 20 direct quotes. That's not the way we want to be writing for a dissertation. So practice that now. If you're using a lot of direct quotes, get rid of them. Paraphrase the information when you can. If it's impossible to relay the same information through paraphrasing, then fine, go ahead and use a direct quote. But there shouldn't be in these assignments. I mean, if you have one direct quote, fine, but you should not have 3, 4, 5, 6 and more direct quotes in these assignments. Okay, so this one I've mentioned before, it is tricky. Again, I don't make these APA rules, we just all have to follow them. So it is a little tricky, but this is for narrative citations only. In one paragraph, you're using the year the first time you use a narrative citation, and this is always for the same source. If you're switching sources, then the rule resets. But Smith and Jones 2018 in parentheses, but then the next time you use a Smith and Jones narrative citation, you don't use the year if it's within the same paragraph. If you use a parenthetical citation, you still use the year. So Smith and Jones, comma, 2018 inside the parentheses. This rule resets with each new paragraph. So again, it's wonky. You might have to read it a few times to let it sink in, but it is the rule. Parenthetical citations with more than one source should always be listed in alphabetical order, not in chronological order or any other order, always in alphabetical. So if you have at the end of a sentence, Smith and Roberts, comma, 2018, and Barnaby, or semicolon, Barnaby, 2003. The years have no bearing on this. All you're looking at are the names. So Barnaby is going to be first, and then Smith and the R. I can't remember even what name I just used, but whatever the R was. You were never switching the order of authors for one source. So I'm going to go back to Jones because I can remember that. So for Smith and Jones, you would never change it to Jones and Smith. You always leave the author order the way it is presented in the article. There's reasons for author, first, second, third authorship. So always leave those, but individual sources, those are going to be each placed in alphabetical order and in a parenthetical citation. Narrative citations, this is kind of a gray area. It depends how you're presenting the information, but typically a literature review chapter, so chapter 2, which all of the writing that you're doing typically is the type of writing you're going to see in chapter 2. Some of the writing in different courses, like your methods courses, etc., you may also see in chapter 3, but this type of literature writing is in 2. So chapter 2 should be organized by topics. So you have your sections, but then within each topic section, your narrative citations will typically take on chronological order. The reason for that is if you say in 2006, so-and-so did a study and found this, and then, that was further supported in 2019 by XYZ who did their study. If you had it flipped, it would be harder to show that stepping support. So typically you'll see narrative citations done in chronological order because you're presenting it from back to front. All right, et al. Is plural, so please treat it that way. Narrative citations use, I already said this, and parenthetical citations use the ampersand. All right, so secondary work citations. So interestingly, I'm not seeing this in this class right now. I am seeing it in some of my new advisee work. So I want to make sure you guys are not doing that when you get to that point. When you are writing for coursework, if you don't have a chance or time, etc., to go find all the primary sources, that's fine. But when you get to dissertation work, your first intention should always be to find that primary source. Sometimes it's not possible. It doesn't exist anymore. It's just not available, whatever. So there are times when you will need to use a secondary source citation, and that's okay. But that's kind of like the direct quote thing. Like you might have 1 or 2 of those in your whole dissertation. In general, you are going to have primary sources in your work and primary source citations. So an example, in the article you were reading by Jones 2017, it says 23% of dogs have brown spots, and they cite Smith. So what do? So for your in-text citation, you would have something like this. According to Smith 2015, 23% of dogs have spots, as cited in Jones 2017. this is not a hard and fast rule. You can alter that wording, alter where you could put it all in the parentheses. Dogs, 23% of dogs have spots. And then in the parentheses, you could put Smith 2015 as cited in Jones 2017. So there's not a specific way to do it, but you need to make sure that in text, you're using both sources. In the reference section, you are only citing the one that you actually had in front of you on your screen, in your hands, whatever. You're only citing, so in this case, the secondary source, which is Jones. All right, transitional expressions. So the transitional expressions help you to move from one article to another article, or one set of ideas to another set of ideas. So I've given you an example here. I'm not going to go through it, but some of the phrases you can see I've highlighted. So you can see in this paragraph, there's different studies being introduced. This is not about one study. This is a topic section with multiple studies interfused here, or infused, intertwined. I made up a word. And so you can see how you can move along, in addition, however, moreover, etc. You can see in here that there are situations where we have a 2016 and then an 08, a 12 later. So this is not in chronological order. I said earlier, a few minutes ago, generally that's how you're going to present information. When you're kind of doing that stepping stone and building to show the progression of studies in that area, it does not always mean that you're going to have everything in chronological order. It depends on how you're writing about the topics. So that's why they are like. Okay, the next slide is about connective language. This is when you're talking about one source and you are trying to avoid doing Smith and Jones, Smith and Jones, Smith and Jones every sentence. So how do you avoid that? And this is a paragraph example. Again, I'm not going to read it all here, but you can look through and you don't see parenthetical citation one after the other. You start out with a narrative, and then there's connective language, so that you're making it clear to the reader, this information, this statement also came from Bass and Abolio 1994, and so did this statement. And then usually you want to cap that off with a parenthetical citation regardless. It's important to use connective language, because what happens is, if you have this sentence with narrative citation and then you move to this one and you don't use connective language, then I don't know if this is you telling me this, kind of making it up, if you will, your thought on the model, or if this is part of something from Bass and Abolio. So it's really important to use that connective language, because you'll find in your dissertations, just about every line, every other, maybe every two, is cited or connected, because it's not about your thoughts in a literature review. It's about you telling the reader what everybody else has published on this specific topic. So it's really important that you let the reader know, hey, these are not my thoughts. I'm telling you, this came from Bass and Abolio in a way that I'm using connective language. All right, reference list citations. So we will do this quickly. It's an exercise to kind of go through. If you're watching the recording, you can do this as well. If you have Word or email or anything, you can type in open. We'll kind of walk through this together. So the main elements of a citation include these parts, right? Author, date, title, source, and DOI or URL. I completely understand that reference list citations are overwhelming. It looks like there's a lot of information in there, and it's confusing. And then it's a different type of citation. If it's an article or a journal article, it's a different type. If it's a book, if it's this, if it's that, even within journal articles, if it's missing an author or a year or whatever. So there's a lot of variation here. I get that. But most of the time, you are going to be citing journal articles, and this is what they look like, minus the real information. So the source elements, this is where it gets tricky, because you can pretty much, if you kind of count in your hand, author, date, title, source, DOI and URL. There's only 5 components. But inside the source, there's some little sub multiple components. I have no idea why my hand's up. I didn't put it up, so we're just gonna ignore me and leave it there. All right. So under the source, you have a source title, a volume, an issue, page range, and a DOI or URL. So this is all for the source. This is the source title is different than the title. This is the work title. So now we went from 5 to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 items. So it gets a little more complex, but we're breaking it down right now to try to make it a little bit more manageable in your brains. So this is what it would look like. So we have Grady, and this is how you write out the names with the initials and the periods and the commas. You can see here, when you are writing the title of the work, it should be in sentence case, not title case. So sentence case means only the first letter of the major sections is capitalized, not the first letter of every word, unless it's a proper noun. So emotions and storybooks, but then the subsection starts with a capital letter, and then United States is capitalized because it's a proper noun. And then you have the source title, and you'll notice I have it here italicized because that source title should be italicized. You probably can't tell, but volume is italicized as well. It doesn't look that italicized, but it is. So your volume number gets italicized, but there's no space. It's connected to your issue number, which is not italicized. And then a comma, space, the page range, and then the DOI or URL. So I've given you some links down here that are helpful, but we are going to go over here. And this is where if you have something open, you can do it as we're going. So we are going to look at a specific source. This is the page. And if once I load these slides, you can click here and it will take you to this actual page. But if we look at this, this is the front page of an article. That would be, you know, typical view for what you'd see when you grab an article, either digitally or in a journal physically. This view has everything we need to create our reference list citation. So remember, the source elements, there's 5, technically 8 of them, right? So what are we looking for? We're going to go look for the authors or author. So I want you to find the authors on here and try to create a citation based on what we're going to highlight. So these are the authors. As we find the information, you try to get it typed into a citation. When we look here, this is the date, 2023. Or the authors, instead of taking all the time to write all of that out, you can just abbreviate them for now. Don't ever really abbreviate them, but just for sake of the exercise to move forward, you can abbreviate those as long as you know how they go. And we'll talk about those in a minute. And the date. And then this is the source title. So, no, I'm sorry, not the source title. Sorry, I jumped ahead of myself. This is the title of the work. So you'd want to type that into your reference list citation the way you think it should be typed in. To do that. And again, you can abbreviate words. Don't really abbreviate when it's time, but for purposes here. Okay, then we're going to move on to the source. So this is the name of this source. So now we have to go and get the other elements of the source. So we have the source title. Now we need to, oops, oh, sorry, I actually clicked on it. Here we go. So now we need to find the volume number, which is here. And it usually is this easy. It says volume or vol or something that will, you're not having to guess which one of these things on this page is the volume number. The issue number isn't always as clear. So this says number 2. That's our issue number 2. And it's not in English, but that's okay. We can still figure out what we need from this. Our page range, pretty easy to identify. And then the DOI or URL. This one has nicely presented the DOI for us right there. All the other information on here is great to know, but it's kind of white noise. It's not anything that we need for our citation. All right, so I am going to click to the next slide and we're going to look at what your citation should look like. So this is how it should look wherever you typed it. And sometimes when I've done this, I know students have been unclear of what were the first names and what were the last names. So typically, even if a journal is not in, the English language, but the article is, or it's from a country that's not English speaking, but the article or the journal is, typically you're going to see the first name listed first and the surname listed second. So if you're not sure, like this first one here, a studi is likely the surname, the last name to put there, which goes first in the citation. Okay, so you should be able to compare what you typed and see how you did compared to this. I realize that doing one example doesn't solve all of the reference list issues and moments of when you're going, what is this right? But at least for journal articles, if you become a little more comfortable and you can quickly identify, I'll tell you the big ticket items that are typically wrong or formatted incorrectly when they're brought in from citation software like Zotero or Emerald or some of the other ones. They might transfer in 98% of the time correctly, but they don't always. Some programs always transfer something in incorrectly. It might be for some programs, it might be that same thing is always wrong. So when you bring them in, you can't just trust it. You have to do that visual look. So if you can kind of learn those items that are typically incorrect when they're brought in, the first thing that's usually wrong, if something's going to be wrong, is the title of the work is usually in title case instead of sentence case. So always look and make sure that the first letter of every word is not capitalized, that it's just in sentence case. The second item that is often wrong is the volume is not italicized. Those are usually your big ticket items that are incorrect. There may be something else here or there, but if you can learn to look for those two things, and be sure that the source is italicized. Most seem to do that fine, but again, that is something. So it's sentence case on the work title, italics on the source title, and on the volume number. Does anybody who's on have any questions on this? All right, so just our last page is here. I've given you some more, sites where you can go and look at how it's not more sites, it's the APA sites, but they are different pages for different types of sources. And when you click on this, it will give you the most common journal article citation, like we just looked at, but then it gives you other options. So if you run into a situation where you are missing the authors or a year or whatever, you can go to that site or look in the APA manual, either way, and look at, okay, wait, what do I do when this piece is missing? And then this is just talking about the literature reviews in terms of what they are. I left this piece in here oops, I should have deleted that. I will have to remember to do that when I post this because that won't make sense to you. But this, so in 7010, if you remember, we really worked on literature reviews, but it's applicable here because essentially what you are pulling together for week 5 in this class is a bunch of different sections that basically comes into a report, but it's similar to a literature review in the formatting and the style. So if you're writing a section where you are supporting it with sources, and it's not necessarily the case for every section in this assignment for this course, but you want to be sure that you are synthesizing, meaning you're not just saying article 1 said this, article 2 said this, article 3 said this. You're bringing the articles together. So you want to organize your information by topic and content, not by article. You may see the same article referenced multiple times in a work, whether it's an article or let's just call it a literature review. But within one section, you might see 4 or 5 sources infused together, and then those sources may appear in other places too. So it's not just this article said, then that one. All right. I'm going to actually stop sharing for a moment here. Does anybody have any questions on what we just looked at? Just trying to get over to our project. Okay, so if there's no questions, I am quickly going to pull up the project, and I did cover the project in the weekly announcement, so I'm not going to go through it thoroughly here, but if anybody has any questions, I'll be happy to answer those now based on the week 5 submission or week 6, or even 7, the presentation. Does anybody have anything floating around in there that you're curious about?
Hey, Dr. B, just quickly, on week 2, the proposal in the timeline that we did, so certainly we're just checking off each section to make sure that our framework is intact for this assignment. Does it need to be close to complete, or you just want us to pull in what we did in week 2, for example, the actual proposal? Then week 3, we did the diagnostic plan and the data collection, and then what the assignment we just submitted to you to pull all the feedback together and just make sure the framework is intact, or we should get to as complete as we can for the submission.
So I'm glad you asked that. So it should be a full draft of what, it should be as complete as it can. You're not just pulling in the sections, you are, and I know that's different than the project that we do in 7010, but in this course, this should be a full out draft exactly the way you want it to look. So technically what should happen, I just want to make sure that it says that in here, that there's no confusion. Yeah, okay, so with good transitions. Okay, so you are, yeah, the 16 pages max. So it's, you're basically following this outline, but for the week 5 assignment. The best way that I would tell you to do this is look at the feedback from the previous weeks, whichever, whatever section you're working on, whatever week that was in, look at the feedback. If you need to enhance that section, go ahead and do that. If you had the high score and I said, great, excellent work on this section, you don't need to do anything. You can just pull that section in the way it is. I mentioned this in the Wednesday video, but one thing to really be careful for is overlap, because you're going to be tired if you're human in a DBA program. I'm sure you're going to be tired. So I can pretty much check that box for you. So when you're doing this and you're tired and you're pulling in, oh, okay, week 2, week 3, week 4, you can't just pull that content in and like stick it in a line and say, okay, it's good, because you did have overlap in your weeks. So you want to take out that overlap. I only need one context, section. The timeline only, depending on how you did your timelines, but if you used the same timeline, I don't need it twice, those kind of things. So make sure you're deleting any redundancy. But just really follow this outline. I did mention in the Wednesday night video, I was talking about the case mostly with this, but maybe the assignment too, I can't remember. Make sure you're using headings. It is very helpful for the reader and for somebody who's reviewing your work, if you can use headings that actually match the sections that you're supposed to put together. Because if I'm looking for a diagnosis section and there's nothing that says diagnosis, diagnostic, something to that effect, then I'm having to search and say, is this in here? And I have to figure out where I think it is. And then, is this your diagnostic, or was this meant to be something else? And I'm just thinking it's the diagnostic. So please make sure that you are labeling your sections with these labels. Marge, to speak more to your question, once your week 5 is put together, and I'm going to compare each section back to those previous weeks, and I will give you new feedback, but I also check to make sure, did you listen to the feedback the first time? Did you make those updates? What was I looking for you to do? Did you do it, etc. When you do your week 6 work, that should be a very light lift, because if you listened to the feedback and made the improvements for each section from all the weeks, that means your heavier lift is week 5 to do all those updates and edits. And then your lighter week is week 6, because your week 5 should be pretty close to, it should be pretty good. It doesn't mean everybody's will be or that it has to be, but it should be in the week 5. Does that help, Marge? Oh, you're on mute.
Yeah, it does. So my next question is, I did a better job in connecting my my problem with my intervention in my last assignment, where that was an area for improvement in my earlier assignment. So I can utilize that information, but some of the feedback that you had mentioned on the early assignments, for example, I didn't have to use all the tools that were available to me. I could have just selected if I'm going to do a survey, or if I'm going to do interviews, or a focus group, or that I didn't have to list all of them. So that's part of my question is, as I frame it and pull it all together, taking pieces of the prior work that I scored the highest, then I should be in good shape. For example, as I mentioned, make the connection I did in the last assignment versus the work I did in the first assignment, I should be able to meet that requirement, correct? Meaning I don't need to keep building on the first one. I can utilize the work that I did in the latest assignment if it meets, for example, data collection.
Right. Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah. That the first work may be almost kind of a moot point, because if you updated things in the next weeks, so that's totally fine. Great.
Okay.
Eric, oops, sorry, Marge. Yeah, are you good?
I'm good. Thank you.
All right, perfect. Thanks. Okay, Erica, go ahead.
For week 7 for the submission to YouTube, do you have a preference on if it's a personal YouTube channel, or does the YouTube channel have to be tied to the school account?
No, so it can be personal. It can be whatever account you make or have, but the YouTube video, I say needs to be public, because I have had so many issues where I go to grade them and I can't access them. Some people over the years have said, listen, I don't want information out there about my company, whatever. And that's fine. So you should be able to send me, I think the other option is unlisted, where if you send me the link, I can open it, but test it out with somebody and make sure that they can open it, because the last thing you want is, I'm up against a time clock for final grades and I go to open your video and I can't. So I don't care what the channel looks like, as long as I can open your video.
Okay, thank you. And then just a short follow on there. Once everything is graded and the course concludes, we can take the video down.
Absolutely, yes.
Thank you.
Anything else on the project? Okay, I'm gonna stop the recording. If anyone's watching the recording and you have questions, please feel free to reach out.